an early afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Today, what we wanted to focus on was the impact of the coronavirus on all solar installers and the economy. Obviously, in our view, it's going to be a pretty big deal. And so we want to make sure that everybody who is joining us, who is listening, everybody is actually able to learn as much as they can about how to think about what the economy looks like when COVID is said and done, as well as where we go from here is if we're in solar installers and how we want to play out the current situation to be best balanced for success. So with that, I'm going to continue on. Let's see here. So first, just a disclaimer, it is only my opinion or only our opinion. It's not advice. Everything changes in this environment literally daily, and we're going to point some of that out, which is fascinating. But hopefully it gives you a directional view of how you can think about your business and be successful. So the topics we're going to cover outside of questions, which feel free to shoot in questions as I go. Jamie will arrange those questions and we will get into more detail on that when we come to the conclusion. First, we're going to hit the economy. So what does that look like? How do you think about that? You know, what's really going on out there? We're going to keep it pretty simple, but it should be a very good overview with the most current research. We're going to go into how to manage cash flows in uncertain times. So one of the biggest issues that all companies, literally all companies, are going to see are cash flow issues over the next 6 months. And so we want you to be 100% prepared with the right mindset, thinking about it with the right tools to be successful. We're going to talk briefly about sales tactics during difficult times, and then we're also going to have another webinar on sales tactics in the future, and I'll hit a little bit of lead generation there as well. We're going to talk about business loans, right? So if you know you're going to have a cash flow issue, or the whole economy is, where do you get those business loans? And then essentially, how do you support your employees and contractors? Really the main thing that we should be thinking about as well as our teams. So we talk a lot about that as well. So I'm going to get through this, and then we'll get to some questions. So the economy, let's start there. To understand the economy, we really have to understand what's happening with coronavirus. And I believe today we hit 1 million cases in the United States. If I recall properly, it's a pretty big jump. And essentially on the left of this, you'll see the coronavirus impact as far as mortality. And charted mortality to date is somewhere between 0.5% and 1% outside of China. That's only if we have enough hospital beds. That's only if people get sick over a period of time versus all at once. And you can see that in comparison to the seasonal flu, which is 0.1% to 0.2%. So very small comparatively. So this is actually a decently high mortality rate. Compared to SARS, which was 9%, but really never made it to our country, it's much lower. And compared to the Spanish flu, it's actually much lower. It's half that, or a fourth of that, depending on how you count. But it is something to be scared of. And the thing I want to make sure that we at least know is for those in the age brackets of 50 and under, it has an effect, but it doesn't have the same effect that if you're, in the 50 on up range. And at 80, you see on the right-hand side of this left-hand side, you can see that 80-plus-year-olds have a 14.8% mortality rate based off recent data, and this isn't changed that much from what we've seen. So it's still much higher, even though this is dated February 11th. It's still very good data as far as how to think about the virus. And then when you take a look at the 70 to 79-year-olds, again, a higher mortality rate. So what we're seeing is there's still a mortality rate if you're in your 30s or 40s. There's less of a mortality rate if you're 20 or under. But it's just worth noting that this is a dangerous virus, and whatever age you are, it's something you have to be careful about being a carrier on, taking into your home, taking into your workplace. It can last for a few days out in the open, so it's something you can pick up on your food as you bring it in the house. So just using these protocols to be safe, just using general protocols to be safe that you're probably reading about by the CDC or others who publish a lot on this is super important. And then, though the majority of infections are mild, as we turn to the right-hand side of this page, 80% plus, the severe ones are pretty severe, and you need to go to the hospital, and often the hospitals are in New York right now running short on ventilators and so forth. So you see a lot of different pieces play out. So just want to make sure that you stay healthy, keep your workforce healthy, and just understand the ramifications of what this is and why it's going to be such a big impact to our economy. We can't see each other and we can't talk to each other. it's always going to have an economic impact, aside from the fact that this is probably the biggest loss of life most Americans have seen in their lifetime, as far as the potential for this virus to do that to us. So pretty substantial. So we'll talk about social distancing for a moment. And you hear, hey, social distancing, you hear a lot about it. Let's stay apart from each other. And the reason for that, there's a few different reasons, but the major reason for that is the fact that at the end of the day, the hospitals can't take the capacity that we would generate if we didn't do social distancing when it comes to needing help and healthcare. So by doing this, you allow the hospitals to actually have enough beds to serve those who are sick and spread out the infection over time. And it's my belief, and from the research we've read, and we keep up on most of everything coming out of all the research outlets, as well as the fact that we've got some tie-ins to both government and top doctors, that this is probably not going away in the short term. It'll probably, my view personally is that it'll go away over summer and reduce pretty substantially, because it doesn't seem to like heat, but time will tell. But it could come back and boomerang in the winter. And the reason why I want to share that is not because I like a fear-based world. It's because I want everybody to plan to be successful and think about what could be, so they plan for their worst case scenario so they are successful and they can weather this rather large storm. So treat yourself if you are sick, and ask those around you to do so as well, is probably the best advice I have. If you Purell yourself and you don't spit on things and you clean up after yourself, you won't get other people around you sick. If they do the same thing, they won't get you sick. And so there's some basics. And don't touch your face. Don't handshake. Give it a little elbow bump or a bow. It's kind of a fun way to go, but it is a reality. Make sure you wash your hands before eating, and Purell if you've got some. And then your clothes can be dirty and carriers. So just take off your clothes, clean up, and then go to work on eating. If you buy something from the grocery store, it doesn't mean it's clean. So just, if you buy like a chicken that's already roasted, just cook it again. And so be careful of what you're purchasing to make sure that along the supply chain, it didn't pick up some sort of bacteria, because people are going to be sick in large numbers. All right, let's talk about the actual economy. So I think you won't be able to see this full title because my head is in the way. There we go, head removed. So when it comes to coronavirus and social distancing, it dramatically impacts the economy. And what I wanted to show you guys with this slide is on the bottom right of this graphic. So this is like a GDP slide in general. And on the bottom right of the graphic, you can see how the GDP falls. And you can see which sectors drive down that fall. And so we're expecting to have a very large GDP drop in Q2, and probably continue on for a period of time, but Q3 I would expect as well for a period. And so you can imagine it as, if people stop traveling, for example, then you can see that in all of the travel GDP. If people stop going to sports and entertainment, you can see that in all of the GDP for the United States generated by sports and entertainment. And then you can basically see how money stops flowing in our economy. And the US has to maintain a positive GDP to continue its prosperity loop and growth. And so when you see these pieces fall out, because you can essentially see everybody staying home and not using these services, it really, really slows the GDP of the country. And that slows the economy, and that leads to a cycle of essentially job loss and other things, because there's no jobs for these things. And as we saw last week, with the largest number of, essentially individuals filing for unemployment, the world has seen 3x any week as far as the way that what happened in the Great Depression. You can see some of these fallout pieces. And if people don't have jobs, then they're not spending, and that doesn't stimulate the economy. And therefore, we need a much bigger $2 trillion bill that helps us through it. So this is a good way of envisioning how the pieces fall out and why that's important. So let's take a look at what this could mean as far as our scenarios here. On the left-hand side, you have a graphic from Goldman, and it's just a representation of a potential direction. But what you see is, you see the global recessions over the last, since the 1980s, essentially. Every gray zone where you see that gray line dipping or going up, that is a recession. And you can also notice the blue line dips in those scenarios. And when you look at the projection for 2020, you can you can very much see a red dotted line projecting that we could very much go into a negative growth place and see a very large percentage decrease in our GDP. And on the right-hand side, you've got graphics from Barclays and another bank, essentially. And you can see that on the bottom of that, you can see what the GDP scenarios look like. So on the right-hand side bottom, you see a heavy situation where this is hard on the United States because COVID grows. On the left-hand side, you see before COVID, and on the middle side, you see the baseline cases. I can tell you that this changed by 1 to 1.5% over the last week into the negative. So the banks are forecasting as best they can, but they're also waiting for this to unfold. And every projection that you saw from pretty much every bank, I read almost all of the reports, it's gotten more negative over the last couple of weeks than it was 3 weeks ago, than it was 2 weeks ago, than it was 1 week ago, as they see how this is playing out. So it goes to show that even the best projectors of what is happening in this type of environment have a hard time projecting out how this will play and what that means for GDP. And they're literally having to update their models every week. So, my view is that honestly, I believe we're going into more of a recessionary period. I believe it'll be very hard to stimulate the economy again in the same way, and we're gonna have to slog it out for about a year. But I hope I'm wrong. I love being wrong on these things, and I don't like to be a doomsdayer. I much rather see the economy being very strong. That said, I think for solar and storage, there's a huge opportunity, and we'll talk about it later. What I did want you guys to see on this slide is just essentially taking a look at, I'm gonna move my head in case that's in your guys' way. It's not that useful anyway. So I wanted to talk about corporate cash flows. So if you're a small business and you are looking at your own cash flows, that's gonna be the most important thing that you can project out and think about right now, is how do you manage those cash flows? Because if you're not in business, you can't keep people employed. If you can't keep people employed, then that service that you're doing and looking out for employees won't work for long. And I think it's really important to understand what cash flows mean. So on the left-hand side of this, you have a statistic from JP Morgan Chase. This was published, I think, 3 years ago. It was a survey of 600,000 different small businesses, and it was basically on cash. And what it says is the average or median business, call it average for all intents and purposes, but the average business has 27 days of cash on hand. And if they use that cash, they don't have more cash. And so what does that mean in the era of COVID? Well, never before have we seen an economy literally come to a halt and people be frozen at home. In declines or depressions or recessions, you see a decrease of commerce, but it happens over time. It doesn't just one day completely stop. And so what this means is that there's not that much cash for most businesses on hand. And you have to be very wary that you've got to manage your cash very tightly, because you only have traditionally 27 days of buffer before you use up your cash flow. And you can stretch that a little bit. You can obviously furlough, you can do certain things, but it's just really important to think about that. And it's different by field. You can see at the bottom of that graphic, there's a whole bunch of little colors. Those are all the different fields and how many days of cash they have. Unfortunately for construction, it's roughly 20. So putting it out there, that's just a way of thinking and saying, hey, if you're not already thinking about cash flows, let's really think about cash flows. It's probably the most important thing you can think about right now. Large companies experience similar issues. So on the right-hand side, this was put out last night by Goldman, and they're projecting that large companies will also have pretty substantial liquidity issues. And so you can already see on the, basically the change for this is the gray area. It's going from a positive cash flow to a negative cash flow. And look how big that gray area is. It's pretty substantial. And the dark blue, that's a already negative cash flow staying in an already negative cash flow. And the light blue, that's a positive cash flow staying at a positive cash flow. So you can see different areas of the economy really drawing up on cash. And some of these will be met by the Fed's easing and giving money out, and the banks lending and helping these guys during this hard period. But it's worth knowing that these factors are going into a lot of what we see in the economy, and they will play out, and they're worth just understanding, because it's not a thing that most people will get to see or see these reports or understand. So I want to make sure that as we look at the reality, it's a tight reality, and preparation is key. That's the biggest takeaway here. Preparation on cash flow is key. So with that, let's talk about how to manage cash flows in uncertain times. And the thing I'll ask you realistically is, let's see here, move my head. Frankly, the words cash is king is not an understatement. And you should be asking yourself, if you have not already, do you have a plan? Have you completed scenario analysis of how this plays out? How long can you support your business if this lasts for 2 months or 3 months? or if it lulls your volumes. What is your counterparty risk on getting paid? Are you ready to take advantage of the current opportunities that are existing from, you name it, either from the loan segments and understanding what those are, from the employment segments and understanding how to help your employees, and from the, from the sales segments. There's a lot of stuff that goes in here, but the major takeaway here is if you're not projecting your cash flows, and if you do not have a plan of action where you've created small little teams in your organization to actually look at some of these issues, if you have an organization or that you've done it yourself and it's you, then that is a really, really good thing to get on instantaneously. And you can see on the right-hand side a graphic, and that graphic is basically a checklist for you from McKinsey & Company on how to protect your team, how to protect your company, and what you should be thinking about as you go through this process. So 1, protect employees. 2, set up cross-functional response teams to drive certain aspects of your business. So for Soligent, we have what we call spider teams. And what that means is we've got a person who makes sure that every one of our employees are taken care of. We look out for their families. We look out for their situations, and we make sure we give a lot of information. We have a cash flow team that's thinking about cash and what does the market do and what do the models look like. We have a sales team, which is a small sales team, not our full sales team, although they're helping in this process. And how do we educate and how do we share information to help every installer? Because our goal isn't just, whether an installer works with us or not, it doesn't matter to us. It's all about helping an industry and sharing everything we know with everybody else. So we've got multiple teams that drive that drive safety, that drive these different pieces of the business. And therefore, I'm not alone trying to drive all of these things. I've got a group of people who are leading subgroups that we meet every day on for 30 minutes, and they're driving substantial progress to help and support the people we care most about. So, number 3 here is test for stress. And that's, again, the modeling. Stabilize the supply chain. So the good news is I think we're your supply chain, and we're watching out to make sure that we have a lot of all the equipment you need, frankly, and we've got the equipment I believe you need. Stay close to customers. That's the only way you're going to learn how to sell to them in this environment and how to convert and how to understand them. We all know that. Practice plan with the team. Go through this. Go through exercises to think about this. Use multiple people to test your logic. If you do this alone, you only come up with a partial solution. So if you have advisors or if you have people in your company who would also like to be a part of it, getting a group to drive this, a confidential group, is a really powerful aspect. But if you can take one thing away from this slide, cash is king, but a plan is everything. So please make sure you think about your plan. Look at this checklist. We can share this PowerPoint with you afterwards. You'll see at every bottom of my slide, at the bottom of the slide, there are links. And you can see here that it says source McKinsey Crisis Management, source McKinsey on COVID-19. Those are things you can click on so you can see in more depth where we get the research, so that you can actually take a look at those articles and learn and grow from those as well. Because obviously on a webinar, we only have so much time. So before I get to the cash flow models, I just wanted to say that, there's a real question that I get asked by a lot of people, are we an essential business? And I will say this. Energy and infrastructure, utilities are all essential businesses in almost every state. It doesn't mean that every state will allow you to operate, so you have to check your own ordinances and what's put out there depending on what state you're in the United States. But it does mean that most of them, if not all of them, will let you operate as an essential business. And so you theoretically can then go put in essential solar equipment, essential storage equipment. You can actually install these things. It doesn't really mean that you can have a Salesforce door knocking. So that's the downside. But it does mean that you can do your daily work of installs, as many installs as you have, theoretically. But you'll have to check with your local areas. And what we suggest is a letter, and we can share a template of a letter. I believe we have it in the appendix, or it'll show up in a second, of how to think about sharing that with your employees. But if you're going to be an essential business and you are an essential business, each one of your employees should have a letter signed by the CEO as they drive around going to the job sites, clarifying that you are a certain type of essential business, what you're doing, etc. So that when somebody pulls them over, if that happens, they have a letter that says, hey, we actually are an essential business. And solar and energy is generally an essential business. Here's my letter. So, whom it may concern, and you can kind of look through this and think about what your words would be. But I think you get an idea of the letter. There's a phone number on here. It's signed by the CEO, and you can word it any way you like, but it clarifies that it's an essential maintenance of essential infrastructure, or essential operations of residences, et cetera, because that's what all of us do. So I'll leave it at that. We can share this deck with you as well. So let's talk about cash flows. So I said cash is king, and I said let's have a plan. And this isn't me talking. This is just years of thinking about this and getting lots of good advice and sharing it with you guys. And this is what we do. So it's actually how we live. And we do this weekly anyway, just how we think about the world, and we project out 6 months ahead because we think it's a super important thing to do in any market that's a bit volatile or just in general. But you should have a cash flow model, and these are 2 links to cash flow models. These links are great because they come from Excel, and they're phenomenal cash flow models. So I like them. I don't claim that we've run over them, and gone over them in detail to make sure they work, but Excel has, and I believe they do work. And we played with them, and I've seen people model in them, so I've seen them work. But what I want you to notice here is that you can do in both of these a futuristic months out cash flow and project out your worst case scenario and project out your best case scenario. And I would really encourage everybody to project out their worst case scenario and sit there and say, oh crap, what does that mean? And make decisions to think about how you'd survive your worst case scenario and what you have to do now to do that. And it will look bad, right? Because you have no cash coming in, it looks bad. But then what's your plan? And once you figure that out, it's a sense of relief after a sense of pain, but you get an idea of how you'll make it through what could be the storm and what you've really got to do. You don't live in a rosy world in that sense. You actually can process, what you've got to process, and that's the hard part. And looking at a cash flow can be a very sobering experience. It can also be a very wonderful experience, but it really gives you a good direction if you do it well on where to go. So let's talk briefly about some sales tactics. And we obviously, I guess, Jamie, feel free to send out our sales webinar for next week over the chat so that people see it and can click through and can join that, because we find it super important that everybody knows how to sell in a remote era. So we're going to send a link out so you can click through and join that webinar now and add it to your list of things that will hopefully help you when you're thinking about selling in this new era. But I also wanted to give a handful of tips on how to close and sell. So first, everybody's home. So they're home, they're there to answer the phone. You're not necessarily top of mind, but they're there. So if you can get a selling tactic down, remotely, phone, you name it, people are home. So then how do you actually think about touching these individuals when you have to sell remote? And we're going to get into selling remote and using Zoom and some other things very briefly. But first, you've got a whole bunch of installs that you probably did. Or you might have friends that have done installs on HVAC, or you might have friends or partners who've done it on other areas. And so you can go to them and you can upsell. And what I mean by an upsell is a battery can often cost $15,000 to $20,000 installed, if not more. So if you can add a battery when somebody is at home, when somebody is worried about power consumption, when somebody is worried about storms coming through, whether it be a hurricane or the power outages that we see in California or even New York, you don't want to be without power in a bad situation. So there's a great upselling opportunity there. Second, past lead lists. So, having the team call past lead lists is pretty critical, and you can actually get through and generate a lot of leads during this time for people who weren't necessarily buyers. Referrals. If you've got happy people that have installed, calling them and actually having a conversation around emotion and checking in and seeing how they're doing and making sure their solar is working in this hard time, and then asking them for referrals because they obviously know that you can't door knock and you can tell them about what your life is like. They may have great referrals for you, and they know who's home, their whole neighborhood. If you want to generate leads, in this era where you're not necessarily able to do it by door knocking, because 50% of solar installers really are door knockers in a lot of these cases. So that's who we are. You have to think about doing then the Facebook ads, Facebook ads and Google ads. And so the way I think about that is there's a lot of good material on that. And Facebook, for $5, you can set up a Facebook ad and test it. But there's a big difference between an expert on Facebook ads or Google SEO, which is search engine optimization, and doing it as a novice. But you can still generate things doing it as a novice and still generate leads. And because you can start with the $5 budget, you can definitely kick off that way. And we're going to have some suggestions for you on our sales session. But what I'd like to say is, if you're thinking about doing Facebook ads, they've got some tutorials to walk you through it. So does Google. They've got people who can actually help you do this at those places. Another phenomenal resource that I found that does this for a living is called HubSpot. And HubSpot has article after article on how to generate leads, how to create virtual pipelines, how to use Facebook ads, Google ads, Instagram, social media, you name it. And so you can literally type into the internet HubSpot, and you'll find, and type in HubSpot lead generation, and you will find different articles, or type in HubSpot Facebook. And so one of the many resources that are out there, we'll obviously share more when we go in depth, but I think that's super important. And then if you've got partners, so if you know somebody who's a roofer or who's HVAC and they've got customer lists, you can trade customer lists and do upselling on other people's customer lists. During hard times, people might be willing to share more. So, dial a friend and ask them if you're allowed to upsell on their customer list and have them share with you if you can get it. It's a very large list, and I'm sure you can create a phenomenal pitch. Pitches. So first, you've got to overcome, as we all know, the fear and recession. People don't like to make decisions during a recessionary pressure or a recessionary period. They like to wait and see. And so how do you actually take a wait and see to, hey, first, this gives you security in a time of not having security. This gives you control in a time of not having control. This gives you the best savings, way beyond what you can expect from the stock market, or actually the easiest way is way beyond what you can expect from treasuries, which have like a 0.8% interest rate over 10 years. This should give you a much better interest rate. In fact, if you put solar and storage together in California, you could pay off in as low as 4 years and be making money off this. And you'll make money from day one, because I'm going to give you the money and I'm going to finance the deal for you. So if you have finance options, that's the way to do it. And now you're going to save every month. So if you were worried about cash, get it while your fight goes good, and you can save every month. So there's a whole bunch of things you guys can think about that can play off those types of subjects that can help you sell. And I'm just throwing out a few different key areas that hopefully can generate some ideas of, hey, how do you switch your sales pitch in this era of selling virtually, and thinking about a downturn as well? And how do you sell into a downturn? It is my hardcore belief that solar and storage in a recession actually emerge as leaders of energy solutions, because they do save money, because they do give security. The last thing you want to be is be in your house having another COVID epidemic in January, or I guess let's call it next year winter, without having a backup power system, because you don't want the power to go out. There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of fear and other things that this cures, that gives people certainty and helps them protect their family, which is really what people are thinking about. And if you're at home all the time, your power bill is going up by nature. So just be aware that that is also something that is fascinating, and people will be paying more for power bills than they may have ever done before, especially if we hit warmer months. So just note those things and how they play out, and how you can build them into your sales pitch. And these are just me sharing ideas to hopefully spur ideas for you guys. I'm not giving you the pitch, but I think our team will share some pitches with you next week. Close. So how do you close? How do you get to people? There's a whole bunch of virtual meeting rooms. There's a Zoom meeting room. There's a G Suite Hangout meeting room. There's a lot of ways to get to people. And I got a question last time I did a presentation, and they said, hey, can somebody get on this without downloading a Zoom or a GoToMeeting? And the answer is, for every one of these virtual meeting rooms, you essentially have the ability to have somebody go to a URL online without downloading anything and see you. So they can see you, they can see your screen, and so forth, and you don't have to have them downloading something. So you have to actually look for that inside of these technologies, but almost all of them have it. So that you don't actually have to create a barrier to having a customer get on with you and have a conversation and see you. But from when you're moving to virtual rooms, and we'll talk about it in a second of which technologies, it's actually a really great ad. So one, you can actually see people, touch people, and visit more people in a short period of time. Two, it's personal. Everybody's experiencing the same thing for the first time in a long time. We've all lived different lives, but now everybody experiences COVID. And so you have something to identify on and identify with, and to start off with, and to have sympathy for, and to see people as a person and a human, and not have to bustle away into a house, but actually to have a great interactive conversation. And you can see people and feel people in a way that it couldn't happen before. Well, it could happen before, but it wasn't always happening. You can notice that my background, so let's say your house is a mess. You can put a professional background on. Now, I'm in my office, but I put the background on just to demo what, for example, in Zoom, a Zoom background looks like. You can see if I stretch out, my hands kind of go away. But for the most part, if I stay put, I can have a very professional setting as kids and dogs and everybody else are running behind me as long as they're not making too much noise. And so you can actually put whatever background image you want. And so there's a lot of powerful moves that you can do to actually help your professionalism even while being home. And if you're in business to business sales, well, it turns out that everybody is calling everybody by functions like Zoom and video chat. I've talked to most of my suppliers on video chat lately. They're getting used to calling. So usually it would take you, a week to get out to see somebody. You'd have to pay for all the airfare, and you have to do all of these different aspects of cost structure. You have to get a presentation in front of them, print it out, you name it. Now you can actually just do it over Zoom, and people are willing to see you because they're seeing other people as well over Zoom. It's becoming a norm. And that norm allows you to sell at lower cost when you're doing B2B. So just a handful of thoughts for you. I'm going to keep moving on. One, you can see here, there's a top 10 list for auto dialers. There's a handful of different great auto dialers that are out there. Ring Central, I believe, has one. There's another one from Five9, but there's a top 10 list, and you can click on this link and get it, or you can just go onto Google, frankly, and type in top 10 auto dialer list 2020, and I'm pretty sure you'll find a good amount of auto dialers that could work for you and rankings on them. But what an auto dialer is it calls all of your customers that you have in a list all at the same time, and every time it connects, it puts it on to a representative of your team, and they can be virtual or they can be in person. And so that's super powerful because you don't want you to have your whole team calling down call list as you're checking in on customers and not getting answers. So when you have an auto dialer, you can advance that process pretty substantially and help drive more dollars for your business. The other piece about auto dialers I think is super important is they have so many phone lines attached to them, so they can dial one person at a time, or they can dial 40 people at a time and then connect the first one they get. And so there's different outcomes from that, but you usually want to have a few more lines than one. Otherwise, it's just as good as you dialing yourself. So, the other thing I think we've noticed is people who get into the homes in areas where they can sit longer and have a higher close rate, but there's just a lot less people getting into homes, and most the door knocking sales forces have really kind of had to take a hiatus because they're just not allowed to sell, as we all know. So hopefully if you can take away anything from this, one, people are home, so you can touch them. Two, how do you upsell? How do you use past leads, lead lists? How to use referrals? You can start to experiment with Facebook, Google ads, etc. And how to use partners, but do with what you're comfortable with, or find somebody who can help you do things where we're actually having success with the other avenues. So you don't try to do something that's too new for you in an era where you've got a lot of things to deal with. Pitch, overcome the fear, get to security. Here's how you can control your destiny. Here's how you save money in an era where nobody saves any money, and we're going to give it to you financed. There's a lot there. And if you need any finance options, we have a Loan Pal option we just launched this week, and you can literally have a few different finance options that we offer. We've got a group called Solar Engine. Reach out to your Soligent person and we'll get you set up with financing if that's something you need. And then finally on the close is virtual rooms, super powerful. Zoom, G Suite, etc. Use them. They're super powerful if you're not already. And this is just, we sent out a resource guide, and Jamie, if you have a moment, could you share the link to our resource guide, the virtual sales resource guide, so that everybody in this chat can go to it and see it as well. But where we've given links and suggestions to selling virtually, and that's gone out to our installer base. So if you usually get our emails, check your emails, type in virtual sales resources, and you'll find this in one of your emails so that you can kind of click on and see the different options. Hopefully it'll help you. So getting to business loans, let's talk briefly on this. There's a lot going on the loan front. So I put a list on this front page. You can see the SBA details, click through link. You can see a list of other known disaster relief programs by state. You can see that there's other options like PayPal Rapid Small Business Loans, which really happen over a matter of days. There's other small business loans that are here, which I made links to as well. And so you can see these options, you can click through, and hopefully you can get money for your business. And whether or not you need it today, if you think you might, these are things to explore, to start trying, to go down multiple avenues, and to really kind of process so that you can get the capital. So let's take a look at the US SBA, Small Business Administration, and what it's offering. So the SBA is offering up to $2 million to help meet anything that you need because of the stress you're under. And there's a website on the right-hand side. You can see their phone number, you can see their email, you can go and actually click on it. You can see the sources at the bottom of this page, but just some high level, $2 million, not to exceed 4% a year, and the loan can be for 30 years. It can help you with your disaster relief and helping your business. So I definitely suggest it. if you need it and you need cash. I think the other pieces of this are yesterday published in phase 3 of the congressional bill that came out. There's even more pieces to this, such as $10,000 instantaneous loans and so forth. But I want you to be aware that these exist so you can search for them. They exist in your states and local governments. They exist through the SBA. But if you're not looking, you won't find them, and there's a lot of dollars there. So cities like San Francisco and whatever city you're in offer a lot of benefits. And so it's just really important to be looking for those benefits. There's deferral of business taxes and licensing fees. There's immediate relief for small businesses of $10,000 from the city. Then you get state benefits, and then you get, the SBA benefits. So it's taking advantage of the dollars that are there to help you. Seek state and federal support, super important. And then there's also philanthropic support. And we've started charting by state the different programs, the different program links. So you can see them at the bottom of this page. Some of those are also on the other pages that you can click through and see by state what's happening in your state, so you can get some of these benefits to help your business during these hard times. And then finally, phase 3 push forward. There's going to be a phase 4, but over $300 billion of small business loans have been issued. Payroll taxes are cut for stimulating employees in a meaningful way, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's tax rebates for individuals that were talked about, or just actually a check, and for $1,500 per adult. And then I think there's something for kids. There's a whole bunch of other things that are being played out. We're going to talk briefly about that in the employee section. So even down to delaying the tax season. So let's talk about the employee side. Everybody, so I think the biggest thing for me is who I work with in our team is what makes our business go around. It's our lifeblood. Our customers are our lifeblood. Our people are our lifeblood. Our partners are our lifeblood. And it is super, super important that I do everything possible to support everybody and support our team so our team can support everybody else. And so I wanted to share with you, what can you do, even if you have to lay people off in this environment? What are the benefits that are out there to help you in hard times and to think about this? So at a high level, there are a lot of federal programs that are starting to emerge. There's an Emergency Paid Leave Act of 2020. And basically there's a few different things here. So I'll summarize this whole page with the federal government in phase 3 has given out, if you are sick and you want to take paid leave, you can take paid leave for 2 weeks. If you have a family member that's sick and you need to take care of them, or you have kids that are home from school, starting in April 1st for both these, you can essentially take multiple weeks off. You get paid 2/3 pay, but maybe you can mix that with your other PTO or something else. And now all of a sudden, if you have to be off and you have to take care of people, or you have to be furloughed and you're the employer having to furlough individuals, there are ways of helping your employees make an income that is from the federal government in a time where you can't have your team working. And so it's really worth noting, because you can actually have people take 2 weeks off if they've got somebody, if they're sick or potentially sick, and you can have them take much longer off if they have to take care of their kids that are home from school or somebody else who's sick. So you'll have to check out some of this as it comes out. We'll send out more. There's a whole big appendix to this that is super important, that goes through a lot of detail, but just due to watching time for you guys, I didn't want to go into what could be a 2-hour session on employee support. But I wanted to put it out there. You should be watching. There's a lot here, a lot of great potential to help your employees, even if you have to lay them off for a period of time. And each state has its benefits. So here's a mix between, this is specific to California, but it gives you an idea. There's disability insurance, there's paid family leave, there's unemployment insurance, there's paid sick leave, there's worker compensation. These things existed before this bill. So a lot of states have a lot of things in place that you may or may not be aware of that help all of our employees, even if you can't have them come to work because you need to watch your cash flows. They help your employees actually make enough money to do okay during a really big downturn scenario, and then come back to work when the scenario picks up. So, and this is my, how do you take care of people, and how do you actually help your business survive so that you can take care of more people over time. That's that hat. And then finally, I would say, hey guys, look, the biggest thing is communication. So if we don't have communication, then people just assume chaos. They assume the worst. So how do you actually get in front of your employees and create the right type of communication? So the first and most important is safety. We have to operate warehouses during this time to supply our critical infrastructure. And we have people in masks, we have people in gloves, we do safety meetings every morning. We repeat, we rinse and repeat constantly to make sure that everybody is safe and that they're protected. They understand what's happening, and we touch them constantly. We do that with the whole team. We are trying to interact. We are trying to be as touch friendly as possible. We take a pulse using our spider team to make sure that people are feeling okay. And if they're not, we encourage them to reach out to our HR team to make sure they're having those conversations, because this is not easy for anybody. This is a change in reality, and it's a hard change. So us being able to look out for their safety, us being able to communicate as leaders of businesses, and if you can't do it, assign your best communicator to just touch people, touch base with people, check in, send out emails on communication, do a phone call. If you've got a small team every morning, great anyway. If you've got a remote team that used to not be remote, is kicking off every morning with a standing meeting saying, here's the safety for the day, and here's the update on what's going on out there, and what are you focused on, and what are going to be your results by the end of the day. Standing meetings go a long way for all things when it comes to these businesses. But just want you to remember, communication is key. You can't really over communicate in these types of times. You can say the wrong things, but you can't over communicate. So really, I think it's about being empathetic. It's about sharing information. It's about keeping people safe. And safety extends not just to people in the work environment. Safety extends to their family. Safety extends to them in their homes and their environments. We very much care for every one of our employees and their families in every situation, and we want to hear about it if it's something we can help on. So it's a community, and I want to make sure that we're all building communities. It's our job to take care of each other, whether that be your employees, that be peers. It's our job to help each other be successful. So, and then, finally, we talked briefly, but really think about how you implement good work from home processes. So somebody sitting on a couch is way less effective than taking home their stuff from the office and creating a workspace that's specific to them, where they may have kids running around, but they can shut the door, even if it's their bedroom. So thinking about the places your employees are working, helping them craft a real workspace if they're going to be home for a while, and leveraging these technologies that we've been talking about for your company, even creating a virtual meeting room where they can always just jump in. If they're used to walking into your office, they can jump in and see you every day and say hi and check in, and you can check in with them. So there's lots of ways of doing this and keeping an open virtual meeting room or setting meeting times, but think about what's best for your team. And obviously we've got more practices on this in the appendix. So I wanted to keep it brief, and I wanted to keep it to 45 minutes. A lot of content, but if I could have you take away anything, I would say, hey, look, cash is going to be an issue for the economy in general. It's not a well-spoken thing. People want the best, but cash is king, and do your cash flows and do your emergency planning. Because you can't necessarily predict where all this will go. And I like to be rosy-eyed, but planning for the worst is what's going to really help you as a business leader. Second, the transition to virtual selling. Even if we go back to selling door to door, it's still a transition that will probably have to happen in the fall anyway if this virus comes back. So learning and doing and calling your peers. We're setting up forums for individuals to learn from each other. We have a CEO group, and then we have other groups when it comes to sales and other things. So Jamie, if you have a moment, could you send out the link so everybody can sign up for a forum and just send us their information, and we'll try to get you into a forum that helps you and that meets with your peers. So I think the short version of that is, if you look in the chat box of this, hopefully Jamie will ping you with the chat, and you can actually see specifically the questionnaire that you can just fill out and submit if you want to join, or you have an interest in joining a forum, or you can forward it to your leadership if you're listening in and you think somebody else would want to join a forum. Feel free to do that as well. It's a link that can definitely be shared. We want to help everybody. I don't care if somebody's a Soligent customer or not. It's just about helping individuals. And then I think finally, it's taking care of our employees when it comes down to this. So how do you make sure that you're taking care of your people, even if you've got to do layoffs, even if you've got to right size your business, even if you've got to slow things, and taking advantage of the dollars that are out there from the SBA and other sources that you might not be as aware of, because you might not be reading every document, congressional document like our team, which I don't blame you for. You've got other things you got to do right now, but we're trying to make that information available. We just want to make sure you know how much money is there. And when a $2 trillion stimulus passes, there's literally something for everybody. It's not a figurative in this case, that's a literal. That's the biggest stimulus that I've ever heard of. And I think that is the biggest stimulus that's ever been. So, with that, if you have questions, please submit those to Jamie over the comment box in Zoom, and I will do my best to answer those questions and give you the best answers I can.